Hello and welcome, rookie card collecting friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I am honored to be joined by a true pioneer in the sports card hobby, Dr. James Beckett. He is the host of Sports Card Insights and the founder of Beckett Publications. And if you're listening to me and not to his podcast, I'm going to ask you, come on now, get with the program and let's go sub to Dr. James Beckett. He gives us insightful podcast 3 times a week, and he has a library of nuggets available to us all. Jim, let me start by saying hello and happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Same to you, Victor. I'm a big fan of your channel as well.
Well, I appreciate that. You are a big influence to this channel, and I wanted to celebrate Father's Day, and I was sitting here thinking. I heard it said recently that behind every great man is another great man that influenced him in some way, shape, or form. And I know I was reflecting on that on my life, and I have like 3 specific men that really poured into me in specific times of my life that I feel that if it wasn't for their influence, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm very, very grateful for those men. And I started thinking about great men that I know, and you came to mind, and I started wondering about your dad in particular, and I wanted to take this opportunity to just maybe glean off of you and maybe glean off of your relationship with your dad and how he impacted you in kind of the man that you came out to be. So you ready to get started?
I'm ready for you, Victor.
All right. I'm gonna start with just a basic question. I know your dad passed away here in the last couple of years. My condolences on that. But I wanted to be sensitive to that. But can you just tell us a little bit about your dad? Maybe just a brief little bio about Dad.
Well, first of all, your statement that behind every great man is, somebody that poured into him. In my case, not just that, but I had a great father who was married to my mom. So she's not necessarily the unsung hero because she was just always there, very dedicated family mom, and hugely interested in sports. My dad was too. My dad was born in Chicago area, north side of Chicago, was a Cubs fan, lived there for probably, well, I could say he was born in 1925. He lived up through the play ball era because they moved in 41. So when I got his cards in 1959 from my grandfather and grandmother, he had 33 Gaudis up through 41 play ball, not complete sets, but enough of each one that I could see that the hobby had real roots from in those days before World War II. And so, my dad played baseball all throughout. He played in college, didn't go beyond that. Then he was a management trainee and worked his way up in management positions for Fortune 500 companies. Had a stint in the Korean War as a lieutenant in the Navy, and but was a dedicated family guy. I was the oldest of 5. We were always into sports, all 5 of us, a brother and 3 sisters, and we're still close. But my dad was a stamp collector, but not really a card collector, except when he was a kid. And he had a brother that was 16 months younger than him, my uncle. Apparently, and if my cousins are listening, it's not my fault. The grandparents gave me the cards. I think they probably were half or 2/3 my dad's and 1/3 my uncle's, but he's passed away now too, and he was a wonderful guy too. So my dad and his brother both played baseball together. They were kind of a double play combination at certain points, and so together they had about 400 cards. Which was just awesome. And when I got them, they were probably worth 10 cents a piece. And my dad didn't give a second. He wasn't thinking, hey, those are mine. He just thought, yeah, you're into cards. Hey, that's going to be great. Like I said, he was into stamps, but not really deeply. He was a very hardworking guy, very kind, very honest. and friendly and very friendly. So he was somebody that didn't tell me what to do, but he just did stuff, and I thought, well, that seems like the right way to do it. And so it was more about observation. I mean, I've had some guys that are mentors in a sense, but they weren't capital M mentors where I met with them every week and they told me what to do. I had some situations where I called on some men who were uh, older than me and had been down a road that I thought, hey, I'm going down this road. I wonder what it's like. I'm going to talk to somebody who's been there. And my dad was one of those guys, but he wasn't. He was. I didn't burden him with that. He really raised me to be pretty independent because
Okay.
that's what his dad had done to him.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was primarily a stamp collector.
Well, primarily a businessman. Yeah, I think when he had 5 kids, he didn't have any time for the stamps.
Exactly.
I just think
Exactly.
but he didn't discourage me. My mom didn't discourage me. The only rule was if it's raining, you can do whatever you want to with your cards. If it's sunny, if it's a nice day, you're going to be outside playing the game, not reading cards about the game. You're going to be out there playing center field or something. Don't get out there. And we moved a lot because my dad was getting promoted, and so I had new neighborhoods with new places to get cards and new cards and new friends, and it was a fabulous socializing experience. And again, my dad was very encouraging in that. But we didn't collect together. I mean, it was never like, hey, these are half my cards or something. And it wasn't like, hey, here's a bunch of money. I think in the total of my life, he gave me a total of 1 cent to buy cards. And that was that very first card, which was probably at the end of my first grade year on a family trip. We went into this place and he, I guess, put a penny down on the counter and bought a penny pack. And he said, here, son. And and again, I'm being facetious because he really encouraged me to make my own decisions and and so if I wanted to buy cards, I did earn my own money. He wasn't
Okay.
buying cards for me.
What,
I don't think I ever bought more than a pack or two. I mean, there's guys in the neighborhood that would buy a box of cards for $1.20, for 24 packs of 5 cents. Not
wow.
me. I had a quarter at most, to buy 5 packs. But it made me take good care of my cards and appreciate them.
Okay.
They were not easily gained.
There's something to be said there.
Said to that. My dad had a great work ethic. He worked really hard and did really well, and I've always been proud of him.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And
I
my mom
know.
had work ethic. So
What did you pull from that one pack?
Spook Jacobs.
Okay.
Yeah, I've said that's of all the cards in the second series of 56 tops, it's probably the worst one you could get. Yeah, I could have gotten Mantle, I could have gotten Mays, I could have gotten Snyder, Berra, Campanella. I could go on.
Yeah.
I got Spook Jacobs.
Oh man. Yeah, my dad was the same way. I don't know if it was the generation. Just my dad was always really focused on work ethic and really instilling that in me. And if I showed just a hint of laziness, man, would he let me have it? He wasn't going to have none of that. But my dad, the proudest thing of my dad is he's a Vietnam veteran. He spent 4 years in the war. Has a ton of medals from the military and photo albums from the military. Just amazing what these men gone through. And he would tell me the stories of each picture and what was happening. And really just proud of my dad in that aspect. I do remember, I was born in 1970. He had just gotten home from the war. And it was one of them things where I did notice a lot of PTSD. It wasn't really identified back then. I didn't really know what was going on, but unfortunately, he had a pretty bad case of it. I can remember being 4, 5, 6 years old, and he was still suffering from it. But a great father as well, as far as work ethic was concerned, taught me a lot of things, especially on how to work with my hands. Taught me a lot about carpentry, taught me a lot about mechanics and just how to work with your hands. And that kind of stuff is invaluable for me today. I still I'm still working with my hands. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, let's move on. I wanted to touch base a little bit on like the personal connection through cards. You kind of touched on that a little bit. But as far as him being supportive with your business, was he okay when you kind of told him, I kind of want to start this sports card thing?
Well, I think my siblings say he was hard on me. I didn't perceive it that way. I perceived that he believed in me and he wanted to bring out the best in me. I didn't think that he was, um, I think he knew that I was deep down very cautious and very analytical. And
Mm,
so if I said, "Hey, Dad, here's what I'm going to do," I mean, I didn't say, "Hey, Dad, I have no idea what to do." I never had no idea. I've got lots of ideas, but I said, "This is what I think I'm going to do." And in fact, I don't even know that I said think. I said, "This is what I'm going to do. This is a great opportunity. I'm going for it." And he was like, "You go for it, son. You got it." He
yeah,
wasn't backstopping me. He wasn't investing in me. I said, "I've saved up money. I'm going to do this." And he said, I believe in you." And that's all you're looking for, that from your family. Not I mean, that's ideal. That's ideal.
yeah, it is.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't go into them with a pipe dream with no money. I had saved up money and I had
mhm,
a track record. And so I was bankable, but I didn't ask them for that. I probably asked them for their prayers. That's
mhm.
about it. And that obviously was helpful because I was very blessed.
Yeah, yeah. The importance of affirming and supporting your kids. I raised 5 kids, Jim, but I can tell you as they're going to college, and I kind of like wanted them to kind of like choose their passions and their own path, and I didn't want to make their way for them, but at the same time, it was like when they were telling me what they're wanting to study and go for it, it's like I tried really hard as a dad to kind of be supportive, but at the same time, internally, I was going, oh my goodness. But
Well, I hear you, but when I was graduating from college, and my mom and dad probably would have said, "Well, what are you gonna do next?"
mhm,
I said, "Well, I'm actually going to graduate school. I'm gonna get a PhD." And it wasn't like,
nice.
"How are we gonna afford that?" I said, "No, I've got a fellowship. I'm gonna fund it myself." And they
Wow.
said, "Well," it was like, "Well, what are we gonna say now? You can't do it if you're gonna pay for it yourself."
Right, right
I
now.
said, "No, I got this. I've got this. This is something. It's I not necessarily a sense of destiny, but I just thought, I'm really enjoying those kind of courses. I frankly, if you get a PhD in a field like that, you'll always have a job the rest of your life if you want to be a professor." And I started out being a professor. I love being a professor. I just love doing what I'm doing now more. But so they knew I was never going to come back and say, "Hey, can I move back home?" That that
Right, right.
that wasn't that done that much anyway in those days. And then, unlike your dad, this was right after Vietnam.
Okay.
So if I'd have been a little bit older, and some of my buddies got caught into that, but by the time I got out of my officer branch course as a lieutenant in the Army, the war had just ended,
Oh,
and so I
wow.
avoided all that stuff. And
Wow.
just it's just God's timing. I didn't choose when to be born or who to be born to. So, and to come into the hobby at exactly the right time, it's very blessed, very blessed.
So what would you, if you had to pinpoint one thing that your dad really poured into you, what do you think it was that kind of shaped you on who you are today, personally and professionally?
I just think he was a hard worker, and he had he had good ideas. What I didn't realize growing up is that he chafed at being in even in senior management at large companies because of the red tape and the bureaucracy and all that. He really longed to be an entrepreneur, but with 5 kids and trying to make sure they were educated as much as they were able, he kind of stayed on the corporate track, but he wasn't happy.
Mm,
He'd have the people shoot down his ideas from the board level or something like that, and
yeah.
And that probably impacted me because I worked for some big companies for a while, and I thought, I'd rather do it myself. I'd rather bet on me. And
Mm.
so seeing my dad bet on himself, so more observation, Victor. It wasn't like, one of the things with kids, you can't say, hey, let me tell you an important lesson right now. Just do
Mm.
it and say, see, this worked for me. It
Yeah.
might work for you too. But if you tell them, hey, here's the moral of the story, they go, come on, that's kind of rubbing it in. So he just did it. I watched him. He was faithful and consistent to my mom, to his even when he wasn't happy in these larger companies, he still worked really hard and did a great job.
Yeah. Jim, I can really relate because raising 5 kids of my own, and they're all grown and gone out of the house. They're in their 30s. But it's one of them things. It was not so much what I said, but who I was. They seem to copy my. I was a role model, so it's like whatever I did, whatever I said, they seem to pick up on that kind of stuff, gravitated towards it quite a bit, and that's a scary thing. But thankfully, and I think I can say the same for your dad, was the work ethic. I think was really crucial for me as well. It's one of the things that I really take away from my dad, and I thank him every time I see him, even today. That's my go-to with him. But your father was he a man of faith?
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah,
Of course, I
and that
remember when he wasn't. He
really,
wasn't, then he was, and then he had another encounter later on. You know, there in the Christian faith, there's different denominations that emphasize things a certain way. Some people think that uh, you choose God, and other people think God chooses you.
mm,
And actually, both are true.
mm,
Somehow it's a mystery. I don't understand. But if God is completely sovereign, and if he's not who he says he is, then
mhm,
he has the power. He can draw people to himself. But we have the perception that we're making a choice. And so
yeah,
whatever happened early on, and it was right before I got my first pack, Victor. Not that
mhm,
it's a coincidence, but right before my parents kind of had a situation where they came to uh, I won't say radical faith, but faith in a more personal way. And I noticed that because all of a sudden we were starting to, we just it was, and I was the oldest. I was really the only one that was really cognizant of, at this point they weren't, and at this point they were.
yeah,
And many years later, after all of us were out of college, my dad got involved in prison ministry, and he was just miserable. He was sharing and trying to assist these offenders who were in, men mainly, and a lot of juveniles, but other, men that had been in prison, incarcerated for certain things, and he was trying to help them,
mm,
and wasn't getting anywhere. And then finally, somehow he figured out that telling them how successful he was and how successful his kids were was not helpful to them
mhm,
because they couldn't relate. In
right,
fact, it's kind of crazy again. And the Christian thing is like they're looking at him and thinking he doesn't even need a savior. you know, we would need a savior because we're in bad shape. But he looks like everything has worked out great for him. What it's easy to say you're a Christian when everything's breaking your way.
yeah,
And so one day he just opened up and said, I really let me tell you about some of my struggles. And when he did, not only did that open him up to those men in prison and had them leaning forward in their chairs, but he brought that back home with him of not trying to be infallible and perfect. He was that vulnerability is opens up the doors to greater intimacy and
yeah,
greater and deeper level of conversation. And so he had that in the prison fellowship, a captive audience there. All of a sudden, they were looking forward to him coming back,
mm,
visiting with him because he wasn't sharing stories of success always, but I mean he had a lot of successes, but he was sharing things where things didn't work out. And if you're saying, so it was, and so I remember that too. I remember the before and after of that too. And
well,
again,
how long did he do prison ministry for?
Probably 40 years,
Wow.
45 years, maybe.
Wow,
Well, this
that's a long time,
well,
Jim.
no, this was in the early days of Chuck Colson.
Okay.
Yeah, in Prison Fellowship. So he was one of the original guys, kind of. He's right in there,
Oh,
and it just was. It was wonderful to see because
yeah.
it again it was observing a change that was for the better, that was kind of counter instinctive, that you could connect with people by sharing your struggles.
Yeah.
And so, I had a heart attack 28 years ago now, and that opened up me to. I certainly wasn't infallible. Here, this guy, I was doing a lot of things right, but you almost die, and then people say, "Well, what, I want to. How'd that happen?" Bad
Yeah.
things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. So
Yeah.
we will net a lot of things in. I was gonna. I compare Christianity sometimes to the collecting world. Is that in both there's a lot of mystery. We won't find out about why certain things were done until we get to heaven, or the great part of heaven that has collectors in it.
Well said. I like that. Yeah, my dad did not come to faith. Um, so in that aspect, I followed in the role model that was set before me. I was headed down a really bad road, and I found Christ at age 32. And I tell you what, it's been a blessing in so many ways. But I also, a lot of people don't know this. I also was in ministry for close to 20 years. I was a teacher. I ran a men's ministry group for close to a decade, and with the pandemic, the church ended up closing, and that just brought in like a big uh, church split, I guess you can say. But I'm under new. I'm recently found another church here in the last few years, and thankful for that season that I had in life, and thankful that my kids too. I think it's been a big impact to them as I talk to them now as adults, and that was Dad. It was so cool seeing the transformation. We were old enough to understand what was going on, but then when you found Christ, it's like the example you set for us after that was just life changing for them.
Well, like my dad, I mean, he wasn't a terrible person before. It's just that it anchored him. It
Yeah,
anchored him on truth,
right.
biblical truth, which is upsetting to certain people and very comforting to many others.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was a terrible person
Okay,
before.
well, my dad was not a terrible person, but he was yeah, no, but still, there's you know, Christianity is pass fail. It's not a grading on the curve, and it's not getting a grade of any kind. You're either in or you're out. And if you're in, you're on the journey to to growing.
Yeah,
And so once you're on the journey, you don't arrive till you get to heaven. So
yeah,
getting spiritual here, but like I said, there's a lot of tie-ins with collecting is a lifelong pursuit.
right.
When you're done collecting, it's well done, good and faithful collector.
Right.
You're honest with your fellow collectors, and you better to give than to receive.
Wow, I never put all that together like that, but that's pretty cool. You're right. Well, let's move on to kind of like nostalgia. I know you might have mentioned it already, but do you have like a collectible or some type of memento that really reminds you of Dad?
Well, I mean, I've got on my wall, I've got a Ruth and a Gehrig that used to be his.
That used to be
About
his.
that I saw that I slabbed him up, and they're on there, and I think that's mainly it. I mean, the other cards got blended into my sets, uh, but again, it's not. It's not that. I mean, I got away from the nostalgia when I started doing all the price guide stuff, to where I had a company I turned this hobby into a business for myself. And again, my dad, he thought that was good. He thought that was good. And he also was concerned that, well, what's going to happen to your hobby? I said, well, my hobby's going to be on the back burner. I've got to be a responsible boss and entrepreneur for something that was a tiger by the tail.
Yeah.
I want to do it right. But I had great conversations with my dad over every decade. We'd have good conversations, but it wasn't like, Dad, I have no idea what to do. Give me some insight. It was like, hey, I'm thinking about this. And he'd say, well, what about this? So well, I was thinking about, we were very like-minded in many respects. I'd listen
Wow.
to him giving advice to my brother, and I'd think, wow, that's exactly what I would have said.
Mm. That's so cool.
But we were both firstborns, my dad and I. And so we both had it's kind of that there's a responsibility quotient you get if you're firstborn a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, I want to go into fatherhood and the hobby today. As a father yourself, how did you approach the hobby and your kids? And did any of your kids become collectors themselves?
Not really. And, I was thinking about how to give wisdom here. I mean, basically, your kids watch you.
Hmm.
They hear you, but they see you, and they can tell what your priorities are. And if
Hmm.
your priorities, uh, not between 8 and 5, if Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, every dad ought to be concentrating on his business or during those normal business hours.
Hmm.
After normal business hours, if you're not really, even if you're home, if you're not present, that's a bad thing. So they see that. So they need to know that they are important. They're not the most important thing, but they are an important thing and more important than your hobby, and even more important if your hobby is a business. So for me, it was my hobby. I loved it, but it was also a business. And so it was
Hmm.
also providing, putting, food on the table for my family. So but you don't want them to think it's the hobby or the job or them, and it wasn't. However, when they watch how hard you work and see that I was gifted and kind of equipped to do those kind of things, I always wanted them to do something that they also felt passionate about.
Hmm.
So it became like, here's my goofy analogy, is that when my kids were, every one of them probably, when they were growing up, uh, none of them really liked vegetables. And I thought, well, how am I going to get them to eat vegetables? Now, my wife likes to like chop them up in little tiny pieces and kind of inject them into the mashed potatoes or something. I'm not sure that works. But I'd grill some asparagus and say, oh man, this is so good. Do you want some? And they say, oh, yucky. And I said, well, can I have some more then? Can I have yours? They said, well, you want more? I said, oh yeah, this is great. Next night, broccoli. I said, oh, this broccoli is so good. Do you want some? Oh, it stinks. So, well, give me yours then. You know, the
Yeah.
next night it was beets. And the next night it was peas, and the next whatever. And after a while, they go, well, if it's so bad, how come my dad is having seconds?
Right.
Okay. So that's the way it was. My problem was in the card collecting aspect. I was taking seconds and they were still saying, you know what? I really don't think I want to follow that path of being a card collector. And that was okay. And you just have to love them uh, according to how they feel directed. You want to help them make good choices, but they're their choices, not
Yeah. Yeah.
choices. Otherwise, and you don't, and the other thing you don't want your kids to copy you in order to please you. So I made it very clear, look, this is my path, and you're welcome to this, and I'll help you, but if you're interested in something else, I'll help you in that too. And so that's really been the case. And so it actually is easier, Victor, sometimes.
Hmm.
I've done some father and sons myself on these Father's Day episodes I've done over the last 5 years, and some of the fathers, the fathers and son work together, and others they don't.
Hmm.
But that's not the important thing. The important thing is, do they have a good relationship?
Right.
So that's all I'm looking for. I
Right. Right. And I think sometimes we might put a little too much pressure perhaps on wanting our kids to collect. It's something that I wish I could have. None of my kids ended up being collector of sports cards. I would take them to shows with me in the early 2000s when I was a dealer, and they would come. They wanted to come, and they loved coming with me. But at one point, they wanted to collect themselves, and so I kind of led them down the path of being a player collector.
Yeah.
And we kind of started little collections for all of them, but it seemed like as they got into like their teenage years, that kind of all went, like the same with us.
Now, Victor, I'm getting a second chance, and you may get a second chance here too. Grandkids are coming around.
Yeah.
Hello. Same way. I'm doing reverse psychology.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a collector, do you? But if you did want to, I could help you, but you probably don't. Let them. Well, no, I want to find out more about it. Okay.
Yeah. So. You're right. I got a 9-year-old grandson who's showing interest, so that's a lot of fun. Well, Jim, as we wrap up, as we start to land a plane on this one, what advice would you give to a young dad today who wants to share the hobby with their kids and is really struggling with that?
Well, just like I said, like my dad, we had a closer relationship after he got vulnerable. Now it was with prison fellowship, but there was carryover effects in our family that he could really express deeper feelings, and that was good. So if dads can do that, they're in effect giving their kids permission to disagree and to be still loved. So that's the thing. And this hobby crossroads of are they going to be a collector or not? That's minor compared to a lot of other things.
Yeah.
You want them to go in a direction where they can be fulfilled and really fully blossom. I meet with a lot of young guys, and I don't have an agenda for them other than I want, and it's not, it's presumptuous to say you want God's best for them, but that's really what you want. They're made in a certain way, and if they pursue it with their whole heart, generally that's fulfilling. But if you can't say, well, my dad was a doctor, so I'm going to be a doctor. If you're not good at science,
right?
I had a roommate in college that did that. He was going to be a doctor, and he hated science.
So. Yeah. Well said. There's that Bible verse that says, train up a child in the way that they should go and not the way I want them to go, type of thing. Right. And I learned those lessons the hard way with my kids. And it seems like the youngest ended up getting the best version of me, but it's only because I learned all these other lessons with the other 4. Right. But,
well, the youngest of my siblings was my sister Claire, who wound up being one of the 2 presidents of my company.
See,
so we were very close, and that was great. And she will agree that she got a much easier deal from my parents than I did. But my parents were delighted that we were working together for 20 plus years. That was just terrific.
That's amazing. They say the youngest is the smartest.
Well, she's perceptive smart in a way. She wasn't book smart as much as she could read things that weren't there.
Awesome. Well, Jim, we're going to conclude with this one again. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day to you too, Victor.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, and let's do this again.
Absolutely.
All right, friends, there you have it. Talking fatherhood with Dr. James Beckett. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this channel a thumbs up, and we will catch you on the next one.